plume of fire rushed toward Ryu like an exploding star. He dove away. A jolt of pain rushed up from the top of his left tabi boot. It was on fire. He rolled on the ground, smothering the flames. When it was out, the skin of his left calf showed through the scorched hole in his ninja suit. The masked devil was coming toward him. Its leering face loomed larger, filling the room. Ryu felt paralyzed. Was this repulsive, slobbering, fire-breathing monster really his father? It couldn't be! But what if it was? What if the Jaquio really had the power to make such an incredible transformation? Ryu would have to fight to kill, against his own dad. There had to be a way to find out the truth. This mask wasn't just a person. There was some kind of power behind it, some force that gave it life. Ryu knew that there was only one hope, one chance to save himself and save his father, if he existed. Ryu had to find the source of that power. He ducked away from another blast. This time he landed near the door. The door was still open. He ran through. Behind him, the voice of the Jaquio cackled. "You can run, Ryu Hayabusa, but you won't get far. You know this is your father. If you come back to get him, you'll die. If you don't come back, I'll get you. And if you were to escape, I'd kill your dad and your red-headed girlfriend!" The Jaquio's maniacal laughter pounded in his ears. He ran blindly through the hallway, not knowing where to go. In full stride, he pulled the dragon sword from its scabbard. It had saved him when hope was lost. It had shown him the way. He had faith that now, somehow, it would guide him. He held out the sword. The tip pointed to the right, down the path of black stone. It seemed to pull on his hand. Ryu smiled. Someone was on his side. The path wound through the temple, curving, climbing, dipping. Before long, Ryu could hear a noise. It was louder than a roar, longer than an explosion, more desperate than a whine. It seemed to penetrate through his skin to his bones. It came from the end of the corridor, from an open door that sent out a cascade of bright purple light. Ryu approached the room carefully. The dragon sword had not failed him. He couldn't be sure, but this felt like a power source, like a generator that belonged to a great power plant. When he saw what was inside, he was sure. The statue was on a pedestal the size of a small house. It towered upward, dominating the room. Its body was like that of a massive, powerful man. Its face was the face of the masked devil. It opened its mouth. A fireball catapulted out. Then another, then another. Ryu jumped aside. By now he was used to that trick. Or so he thought. The fireballs should have crashed to the ground, at the spot Ryu had just left. But they didn't. In front of his disbelieving eyes, they were curving in mid-air, defying gravity. They were missiles of death, and they weren't going to stop until they found their victim. Ryu jumped away, swinging the dragon sword wildly. Swish! 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 The blade sliced through the flaming missiles, disintegrating them. Ryu wasted no time. He rushed the monster and plunged the dragon sword into its side. A glowing green gelatin spurted out. A drop landed on Ryu's sleeve, with a puff of smoke and a hiss. The patch of material dissolved. He withdrew the dragon's sword and stood back. The goop was now oozing out. The monster's powerful noise was now a sputtering wheeze. Lights flickered and swelled. A fire burst out of the top of the monster's mask. Then, slowly, it began to melt. The grotesque features of the creature's face became twisted and warped. As it shriveled down into a puddle of molten plastic and mangled machinery, It almost seemed to be smiling. Ryu flew out of the room. He raced down the corridors, twisting and turning. Ahead of him was the door to the room that had held the masked devil. He suddenly stopped. What would be in there? If the masked devil was still alive, it might be waiting in ambush. If it were dead, the idea was too horrifying to consider. Ryu stepped closer. He heard a sound. There was something waiting behind the door. He took out his dragon sword again. He leapt into the doorway, poised for battle. The room was completely dark. He could see nothing. Then, from below him came a hoarse whisper. Ryu? There was a dragging noise on the floor. Ryu backed away into the corridor. His heart was racing. But he had come so far, through so many disappointments, that he refused to let his emotions take over. Who are you? He called out. Ryu, the voice repeated. Out of the blackness, a person pulled himself into the light of the hallway. It was a man, thin and ragged looking. His hair was shoulder-length and sweat-soaked, his face unshaven. But when he looked at Ryu, his eyes blazed with a fierce intelligence and a tenderness that could not have belonged to a total stranger. Ryu had not felt anyone look at him, see him as deeply as this man did. He seemed to be sizing Ryu up, counting the years. Ryu tried to say something, but the words choked in his throat. He swallowed and tried again. Are you my... That was all he could get out. The man slowly nodded. Ryu sank to his knees. He returned the man's deep gaze. He saw the pride that burned within, the grief that spilled from his eyes and spread lines of sadness down his face. Sadness over the lost years. Sadness having missed his son's life. You've come for me, Ryu, Dr. Ken Hayabusa said. With a grimace, Dr. Hayabusa picked himself up to a kneeling position. A smile struggled across his lips, and the lines of sadness suddenly etched his face with profound joy. Slowly, gently, he opened his arms. Ryu hesitated. The years of expectation, the violent journey had steeled him. He felt incapable of emotion. Ryu, his father said, when you were a tiny child, I used to recite a poem to you. He laughed. Of course, you wouldn't remember it. And when you're lost, my dearest son, Ryu said, his voice beginning to crack, when joy becomes despair, Dr. Hayabusa finished for him. I'll send a star of deepest gold to let you know I'm there. Ryu fell into his father's arms. Somewhere in the dimmest reaches of his memory, he could recall how they had felt. Back then, the arms that supported him kept his fragile infant body from falling to the ground. Now they were adjusting to a new shape, embracing a young man. Ryu had never felt so complete, so strong. Ow, please! The Jacquio's voice blared. This display is repulsive! This time, the voice was not coming from a speaker. It was behind them. The Jacquio was standing in the doorway. His eyes glared with the intensity of a blast furnace. His lips flared back to reveal tightly clamped teeth. He was seething with fury. Ryu tried to devise a plan. How could he save his father and himself? What would the Jacquio's next move be? Probably a long, gloating speech about the statues. Ryu might be able to use the art of the fire wheel, or... Without saying another word, the Jaquio thrust his open palm in Ryu's direction. Out of it shot a blazing fireball. Ryu was caught by surprise, but his father wasn't. Leaping to his feet like the nimble young ninja he once was, Dr. Hayabusa dove in front of his son. The fireball caught him full force in the chest. With an anguished cry that sliced through Ryu like a bayonet, he crumpled to the ground. "Dad!" The scream ripped Ryu's vocal cords. He grabbed his father by the shoulder, tried to lift him up, but Dr. Hayabusa was limp and motionless. For the first time since Ryu had seen him, he seemed to be at peace. Ryu stood up. At his feet was the motionless body of his father. He was gone. Again. A lifetime of refusing to believe he was dead. A lifetime of nagging hope, of wondering about the letter. A lifetime of training just in case. Well, just in case had come, and Ryu's wildest dream had come true. He had met his father. For about 5 minutes. A madman had stolen 13 years of his father's life, and now that madman had ended it with a flash of temper and a wave of his hand. Ryu went numb for a moment. Then the rage began. It seemed to rise from the ground, burning the soles of his feet. It traveled through his body, making every molecule vibrate. An outline of fire began encircling him. The Jaquio took a step back. Fear didn't quite fit on his face. It made him look awkward, almost comical. The art of the fire wheel was working, but Ryu pulled out his dragon sword just the same. He ran toward the Jaquio, letting out a cry that blotted out all sound in the temple. With a thrust of the sword, with a swelling of flames, the Jaquio collapsed in a shrieking, bubbling mass of protoplasm. In an instant, he disappeared. Ryu fell to his knees. Naked anger still coursed through him. The victory wasn't enough. It never would be enough. Ryu. He whipped around. Could it be? Ryu, come closer. His father was alive. Hope flooded through Ryu's body. He ran to his father. Gently, he knelt down and cradled him in his arms. Are you all right, Dad? Dr. Hayabusa shook his head. His face was tight with pain. Ryu, you must tell me, who has the statues? The statues! Ryu had almost forgotten about him. The Jaquio has them. Had them, he said, but he's gone. There may not be enough time to find them. Vroom! The noise shook the ground like an earthquake. It lifted Ryu and his father and tossed them several feet away. Dr. Hayabusa cried out in agony. What's that? Ryu said. It's the demon, Ryu, Dr. Hayabusa replied, fighting to get the words out through his pain. It's too late to get the statues. We'll have to fight it ourselves. Ryu gave his father a sharp look. Not we, Dad. You're in no condition to move. Dr. Hayabusa tried to rise to his feet. He winced and collapsed. Paralysis, he said. You're right, son. I'm not longer for this world. You must go through the narrow crevice at the end of the hall. If you make it through, you'll be in the demon's lair. Go now. My spirit will be with you. I'll be back to get you, Dad. That's a promise. Ryu bolted out of the room and down the hall. He found the crevice and tried to squeeze through. In the centuries since the demon had gone to sleep, the earth had shifted, making the entrance only inches wide. Layers of dust and cobwebs peeled off the walls and clung to Ryu's uniform. As he got closer, the heat from within blasted him. He hoped he was prepared. A ninja was equipped to survive, but a ninja was still mortal. Even the great shinobi had not been able to defeat the demon. But Ryu couldn't think about that. The future of the world lay in the balance, and it was up to him alone to do what no one else could. He had to squeeze himself through the last few feet. When he did, he crouched beside the narrow hole through which he'd come. All he could do for a few moments was stare in awe. He had never seen anything like the demon. Next to it, a Tyrannosaurus would look petite. Its body was a conglomeration of flesh, bone, and slime, rolling over each other, sputtering and spitting fire. When it moved, it sent hot currents across the room like jet streams. Its breath sounded like chainsaws. In a dark corner of the chamber, Ryu saw the light and dark statues. They stood together between two stone pillars that vaulted upward to a high-peaked ceiling. And with each breath of the demon, they drew closer together, pulsating with light. They were fusing, and Ryu was too late to stop them. All it took was that first look, and Ryu realized the sad, shocking truth. There was no way on earth he stood a chance.